approached us, they were startups, and they approached us for sizable grants. We were very clear that we weren't going to give sizable grants to startups, particularly startups that had no infrastructure and staffs of one. We just weren't going to invest a lot of money there, but what we did have that they needed, beside money, was space. At that time, we were sharing an office space with another foundation, and 2 offices were empty. And so we did what we called incubation. We invited 2 organizations, the Project People Foundation and the Third Wave Foundation, to come and live in our office space for 2 years. They lived there and used our copy machine and used our fax machine and used our telephones, and it was worth more to them, I believe, than the grant that they would have asked for. We had the space, we had the capacity, we incubated them. Now they have large lists of funders, large lists of supporters, and their work has blossomed hugely into something that we're so proud of. We can't say we gave them their first grant, but we can say we gave them more than money. We gave them a home for 2 years. We also had grantees who were using for their programs borrowed space or were renting space to actually conduct their programs. And they said to us, you have a big conference room here. If we could have our board meetings and our training sessions in your conference room, you could save us a total of $2,000 a year because we have to pay to rent space for trainings and board meetings. And we said, gosh, we're happy to do that. You can do that. And so our home became their home. Our space became a way to support them and nurture them. Another thing that we began doing was providing technical assistance. We had grantees that said, listen, we know fundraising 101, we even know fundraising 202, but in this social and political and economic climate, we are really having trouble articulating the significance of our work and competing with all of the 9/11 urgencies that have emerged. How do we articulate to the media? How do we articulate to funders the power and the significance of what we're doing in a way that they'll hear us? And so we started a Summer at Sister Fund Technical Assistance series of workshops where people came and learned how to craft media messages, how to get one story and be able to tell it in 3 minutes that knocked people's socks off. Our grantees came and learned how to use the internet to their advantage in ways that they hadn't had any idea, that they could get resources and information to support their work over the internet. They came and learned how to have board members do the work of fundraising and not just having a fat profile and not having a good-looking resume, but actually do the work of supporting the organization. We did board development, and we began to know each other better, and grantees began to feel better about saying, look, here's our real situation. We didn't want to tell you when we first applied, but here's what's going on our board. And they got help, and we got help, because we figured out how to be more effective. We instituted what we called a Meet the Grantmakers workshop, where we called 10 of our colleagues in the New York City philanthropic community, and we said, listen, will you come and give the grantees that we've funded for the last year an opportunity to hear you talk about your funding priorities and to hear you say what you look for most in a proposal, to hear you say purple paper stands out more than white paper, send your proposal in on purple. Any tips you'd give our grantees in 3 minutes, we'd love to hear it. And if you would sit and listen to our grantees just tell you why their work is important for 3 minutes, it'd be a gift to us. And we got funders from the Open Society Institute, from J.P. Morgan Chase, from Eileen Fisher, from foundations large and small in New York City to sit around a U-shaped table, not unlike this one, and each of our grantees had a chance to just show their stuff for 3 minutes. We worked with them and coached them. We said, now's your big chance, kiddo. Get out there and talk about what your organization is doing that no one else is doing. Why the program that you are hosting in Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn is meeting a particular need in the best way that that need can be met. Please don't get up and spend a minute and a half apologizing for why the ED couldn't be here today and why you wish you had worn a green shirt instead of a blue one. Tell us what's important about your work. Grantees had a chance to talk directly to funders in ways that they hadn't done before. They got entree to hearing funders talk about funding priorities that weren't written in their guidelines. And they had a chance afterward to shake the hand of the senior program officer at the New York Community Trust in the very area where they wanted to meet, in the very area where they needed funding. And so we set up opportunities for them to meet funders. You have one of our special reports, and we've done 2 or 3 in our 13-year history, but our special reports and our newsletters are designed so that our readership gets to know what our grantees are doing. We established ourselves early as an organization that wanted to be a megaphone for women's voices. So we don't really want to talk as much about what the Sister Fund is doing as much as we want to talk about what the grantee organizations are doing. So you'll see profiles of grantees, big portraits. Some of them were glamorous, and some of them were just, I'm a hard-working woman trying to help folks, who have AIDS. But the photographs and the descriptions of the projects helped some of our grantees be known in wider circles. A couple of them called us later and said, listen, thanks. We got calls from funders who read about us in your special report. Our publications became tools to give support that was more than money. We loaned staff support to 2 organizations in particular, and I'll tell you about one. Early in 2001, before September 11th, they were a group of people who were interested. They knew that we were interested in fullness of life for women and girls, locally and internationally. And they were a group of women who said, we're interested in knowing about what Afghan women's lives look like. We're concerned about what we're reading and hearing. And so from January to really September, or to August, or July or August, they met in our conference room, just an ad hoc, informal group, no 501c3, no real interest in it, just a group that had conversation. After September 11th, the world knew about Afghanistan, and the symbol of Afghan women's oppression was the burqa. We didn't know what a burqa was before. We all could draw a picture of a burqa. We knew how it fit and how you looked through the slats around the eyes and nose, and we just knew everything about it. And this small, little fledgling, informal group decided now was a perfect time to become a formal organization and to promote an agenda around Afghan women's empowerment. We had a person on staff who was extremely interested in this. She was skilled in helping organizations start up. She was thoughtful about approach. She really had great media contacts in the city, and that girl knew how to ride a wave, which I think all nonprofits need to learn how to do. If something emerges in the culture or in the media that has anything remotely to do with the issue area that you're interested or the work you want to promote, figure out how to ride that wave. How can you make contacts with reporters and news people who can help you or who will come to you for a quote? Get your foot in the door wherever it can fit and then keep it in there until your agenda is met. And so we literally loaned a staff person. She used 70% of her time building an organization that became Women for Afghan Women, that then hosted the first international conference, one in New York and then one right in Afghanistan on women's issues. They developed a Women's Bill of Rights and met with President, is it Karzai? Karzai, and presented him with their Bill of Rights. This small little group, because we lent staff support, became a group that now organizes 4 or 5 programs for Afghan women immigrants in New York City and supports several schools for girls in Afghanistan. It wasn't a monetary grant, but I would say it was more than money and worthwhile. Finally, we began having conversations with grantees in ways that we had never before, where we said, is there a way that we could help you achieve your goal without a grant? A number of our grant seekers to whom we weren't able to give grants because they didn't meet our guidelines, but we felt like we could support in other ways, like with technical assistance, like with recommending them to an organization or an individual who could help them see what might need to come next. We said, listen, we can't give you a grant, but if you'll have an honest conversation with us, we'll see if we have resources that can support you. We began providing technical support to large and small organizations. One organization, and I mentioned this yesterday, was doing the most foundational, important work with incarcerated women. In New York City, I'll just say this as a brief aside, We have a challenge with Rockefeller drug laws, which were designed to get drug kingpins, like in the 70s and in the 80s. They wanted to get the big dogs who were disseminating drugs into the communities, and they were designed to put these wealthy people, powerful people behind bars. What they succeeded in doing was putting thousands and thousands of women who came from the poorest neighborhoods in New York City, the 3 poorest neighborhoods, 85% of whom have been sexually and physically violated, 75% of whom don't even have a GED behind bars, 75% of whom are mothers of very small children, all of whom were carrying drugs for somebody, small amounts of drugs, had committed no violent crime, carrying small amounts of drugs for somebody else to make money to feed the little people in their home. So moral or immoral, there was an economic bottom line. I need to feed these kids. And so little kids wake up at 6 in the morning, a 2-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 17-year-old, like one of our grantees told her story, and mom is gone because in the middle of the night, mom was carrying some drugs for a boyfriend, for a partner, for a dealer, and got caught and spent 15 of the next years of her life in prison. One of our grantees who was doing outstanding work with women who suddenly found themselves incarcerated with their children still in the Bronx, and they're way upstate in New York. No way to get to them. Don't even know how they're doing. Don't know if they made it through last night. Don't know who's taking care of them. She was doing outstanding work, but she was 76 with no deputy director, no number 2 person, and a part-time administrative assistant. And she needed a very large grant. We would have liked to have given a large grant because her work was outstanding, but it wasn't sustainable when she was 76 and didn't feel good and didn't have anybody who could take over the work in her absence. If she twisted her ankle, it would stop. Do you understand what I mean? And so we said, what might work a little better for you is if we can get you hooked up with a service provider, with a technical assistance provider who can help you think about succession planning, who can help you think about getting grant money maybe to support an executive director. Maybe you'll be the president and you won't do the day-to-day office work, but you'll do the incredible work of ministering to the women who are behind bars and helping them connect with their kids. We began to see ourselves as a resource, and we opened up our office and our library. Some of our grantees said, we would love to have a subscription to, say, the Chronicle on Philanthropy, but it costs too much money and we can't do it. And we said, come to our office, sit in our library, and read it from our office. We got lots of materials from the Foundation Center and from the New York Regional Association for Grantmakers. And we said, come sit in this space, make photocopies, use our information. We're happy to do it. I want to tell you that we began to be more like a sister, and we began to feel more like a sister, and we began to have relationships with not-for-profits in New York City who were doing work we profoundly admired. And we developed relationships that were so much more than the superficial relationships to which we had become accustomed. It wasn't just a check. Suddenly it was Nancy, and I know that she's got a daughter who's graduating from high school next week. And suddenly it was Phoebe, and I know that her mom is struggling with cancer. And suddenly it was Allison, who's getting an award and needs a dress and a pocketbook and a pair of shoes, who wears a size 8, who can do it. It wasn't frilly, it actually began to feel like a sisterhood. I had been despondent because I realized at my first grant cycle that $1 million wasn't going to go nearly as far as we needed it to. Not only could we not support the number of grantees I had hoped, but we couldn't even support the grantees we were willing to support and able to support in the way that they needed to be supported with $1 million. What I discovered, my friends, was that there's more to philanthropy than money, and that our tiny foundation, 3 people strong, had a lot of power, had a lot of resources, had time, talent, and treasure that could be used and was in fact used, I think, very successfully by the grantees that we sought to serve. So I want you to consider, if you are a funder, what it might look like for you to open up your storehouse of resources for your grantees, not just dollars. And if you're leading a nonprofit or working in a nonprofit or helping nonprofits think about how to be effective, I would admonish you like James admonished the church in the ancient Near East. He said, you have not